Hello, and welcome back to the Boldly Embodied podcast. I am just really excited and so honored to have wonderful Ellen Heed here with us today, one of my
Oh,
just beloved mentors and teachers. And I'm just so excited to have this conversation. Um, it's been a long time coming. I feel like Ellen and I go places in our conversations, and I'm really excited to just kind of have them out loud in public to see what happens. So thanks so much, Ellen, for being here. So,
good to.
Ellen, welcome, welcome, welcome. Ellen spent 2 decades grinding her bones in the dance, music, and fashion industries in pain. And to recover, she dove deeply into yoga while learning bodywork. Her next 20 years were spent honing her perceptual skills by giving thousands of bodywork sessions and teaching anatomy worldwide. It bothered her that clients' pelvic floor scars and their consequences went largely unnoticed and unaddressed. So she obtained outstanding results at the crossroads where emotions, biochemistry, and biomechanics conspire with scars to create pain. These discoveries were too important not to share. Integrating holism and somatics and sexology, she completed a doctoral degree at age 60, introducing novel and inclusive methods to work with scar tissue at seen and unseen levels. Now it's time to spread the word and train practitioners. STREAM is Scar Tissue Remediation, Education, and Management. Our radical approach allows students to cultivate extremely accurate perception. STREAM practitioners work in 3 ways: verbally, hands-on, and hands-in. Each of these ways touches the roots of the nervous system so that pain can dissolve. STREAM succeeds because we walk our walk, ask the right questions, and partner with clients to participate in their own healing. So, welcome, Ellen. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for taking the time to share some of your brilliance with us on this podcast.
Good to be here.
So, I would love to start. I have really such a fascination with the stories of how a person comes to do what they do in the world, and like how do we
Mm.
kind of sum up the stories of our experiences in our bodies and get to do what we do. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more in depth about kind of how you came to teach stream as it is now. And I know that emergence is one of our favorite words to use together, so I know that it is still emerging and always emerging, but I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of the path that led you here to teach what you teach now.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's a bit of a long story, but I hope to make it brief because there's many other things to talk about. But I approached yoga as a way to relieve pain, back pain, chronic back pain, as a result of spending 15 years behind a knitting machine, cranking out samples and swatches and sweaters and so forth. And I had my own knitwear company, and I did all my own first sample making, and made ludicrous numbers of choices for people, because what I didn't know at the time was that I'm neurodivergent, and my creativity is on overdrive for anything I approach. So I had to see every possibility, and being someone who falls in the autism camp, that's a lot of possibilities when you have 20 colors. That's like 2,000 potential, or 4,000, some, enormous amounts of different yarns, different colors. I worked with yarn companies and button companies and zipper companies and all kinds of people to help improve their products, and so they would be better suited for what I was designing, which was high-end it's called women's better specialty knitwear. And I sold in department stores and fancy boutiques in everywhere, 50 cities in the United States. And it was fun, but I got very burned out doing it because I was designing 350 sweaters a year. That was a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like a sweater a day, except I grouped it differently. But that still, I was tired, and I was tired of doing what I was doing. And I jumped into yoga. I found a very, very intense teacher who had many gifts, second sight gifts, intuitive gifts, ability to read people, read bodies. In my first class, she said she could tell I had a background in dance. She could tell I um, hadn't moved in a while outside of the habitual movement of behind a knitting machine. And she said she could also tell I was an overachiever. I mean, bam, she had me nailed. In the first 5 minutes of class, she came over, she started whispering in my ear, your only job in this class is to stay out of pain. And I'm like, wow, that's different, because I will push myself into the very edges of pain immediately to get the result. And I just didn't have a sense of limitations or my own limitations. She said, you have to slow down. You have to slow down. Like, okay, wow, that's a lot of insight for the first 5 minutes. And I paid attention to her, and I followed her, and then eventually had a private with her. And in that private lesson, I thought, oh, I'm going to learn all kinds of groovy poses and get in some really advanced stuff because we finally have time together. And no, I walked around the room. That's all she had me do for an hour, is walk around the room. She said, oh, I can tell by the way your sacrum's moving, you're a sexual healer. And I'm like, really? That's news to me. I don't know anything about sexual healing. That's not what I do. But it kind of turned on a light in my brain. And I thought, just created a receptor site for curiosity. And about the same time, I was breaking up out of a long-term partnership with someone, had been 17 years of living together, and confused and heartbroken. And we were business partners, and I needed to reorganize my entire life. And one of my friends said, oh, there's this miracle worker at the local shiatsu school. He can read your bones. He sees through your skin. He'll tell you what's going on with your organs and everything. And I'm like, wow. All right. So I went to the clinic where he was supervising the interns. So that's how you could get to see him. He'd come in and supervise and either talk to you or not talk to you if he thought you were interesting. And this Japanese student was doing the kata, the shiatsu sequence on my spine, and he came in and reviewed and said, sweetheart, stick out your hand. And I stuck out my hand, and he pressed some points in my wrist, and he said, get any heat from that? I'm like, yeah, my whole arm feels like it's on fire. What's that? He said, well, now put your arm behind your back. And I did. And he went under my shoulder blade, and he said, now what's happening? I was on a total trip. I was in an altered state of consciousness with two moves, a couple of points, and then stripping out the fascia between my subscap and my rib cage. I'm like, oh, this feels a lot like smoking a whole bowl of opium. He's doing this with his thumb. What the fuck is this? How is that even possible? And he said, I want to work with you. And he hands me a card. And then I go to work with this guy. And before I know it, he's doing deep tissue work and very provocative emotional release work all over my body. And I just finished my first yoga teacher training. I was very flexible. I was clean in my blood, hadn't had coffee or sugar, or alcohol for 9 weeks in a summer. It's like as clean as my blood had ever been. And yet I was having these really intense emotional releases. And I'm like, oh, wow. Body work can provoke more than feeling good. It can put me in touch with something. I don't even know what I'm holding here. I don't understand why I'm so reactive. And I was very curious about that. And he started talking to me about the psoas and trust and the pecs and grief and, rhomboids and betrayal. And I'm like, what? You can map the body, you can map emotions in the body. And he said, yeah, you ought to come to my graduate seminar for, the advanced students and massage. And I just got dumped into the deep end of the pool, body work wise. And he paired me up with the biggest, meanest, toughest martial artist, the most scarred individual, literally physically in the room, and said, make this guy's muscles go soft. Go deep. Don't be afraid. Just dig in. And that's what I did. And so I just sort of learned right away this thing about scar tissue, because this guy his leg had been broken and his shoulder had been broken and his arm had been broken. He had lots of grisly scars all over. And he said, just find the place where the muscle meets the bone and cross fiber that tendon until he moves chi. I'm like, what does that mean? Till he gets heat in the spot where you're cross fibering. And he was this martial artist was very literate in terms of being able to feel chi in his body, and he could direct me very specifically. So we made a good team. I was big enough and strong enough to get in with the kind of tough exterior he presented. And he started to change very rapidly. And then he became my yoga student, and we started doing privates all the time. And so things snowballed very rapidly. And I was in practice before I was out of school. And because circumstances shifted and I was in a place where I could just study, I closed my garment business, and I sat with an anatomy book for months, 2 months, kind of memorized it, and then got invited to teach anatomy at the Shiatsu school, and then got invited to teach anatomy for Anna Forrest's yoga teacher trainings. And that sort of catapulted into a local career teaching at the Shiatsu school, and then an international career eventually teaching anatomy with Anna. Meanwhile, my bodywork skills continued to develop. And at some point, the guy who became my bodywork mentor, the man who put his thumb under my shoulder blade, said somebody ought to address scars in the pelvic floor, because I have women with brain cancer, and I think it has to do with their episiotomy. It has to do with the fact that the circuit of energy, this is a shiatsu guy, right, that goes in the conception vessel and the governing vessel can't meet and exchange properly at the perineum because of the scar. And he took people out of brain cancer, and he took people out of prostate cancer, and he took people out of all kinds of serious diseases, and scar tissue remediation was a big piece of it. And he sent people to me for pelvic floor scar work. And then I thought, well, gee, I don't know if I actually have scope to do this. I better look around and see what I can do. And it's either physical therapy school, 3 years, thousands of dollars, or it's sexological bodywork training, which is what at that time was a 6-month program. And I opted for that because it seemed like the path of least resistance. And so then I became a sexological bodyworker in 2007, and quickly realized that sexological bodywork needed more rigor. And I told Joe Kramer, the guy who founded sexological bodywork, you guys ought to have an anatomy program as part of this training, because people don't even know the names for the parts. And if we don't have a common language, how are we supposed to communicate with each other? If everyone's calling the vulva a different name and the parts of the vulva, this little piece and that little flap and this, so on and so forth, that's not an efficient way to communicate. So let's do something about that. He said, oh, okay, you want to come train students with me in Australia and start an anatomy module for sexological bodywork? And I'm like, okay, sure. And meanwhile, he'd invited me into this PhD program to become the world's first somatic sexologist, because he was allied with an institution that agreed with him that this was a valuable profession to begin, because no one had ever offered a terminal degree, an advanced degree in anything about embodied sexology that had to do with touch. But the institution was a bit ahead of itself. Its accreditation monitors in various countries that happen to have very active sex trades shut it down, said we will not accredit this program. And I found that really interesting, if not infuriating. At that point, I was 2 years into what was a 6-year PhD process. And I wasn't going to back out of the program, but I was forced to change from somatic sexology to somatic psychology. And I'm like, what psychologist touches their clients on their vulva? And they said, don't worry. You came here to write about your experience working with people with scars in their vulva. We invite you to continue to do so. Just complete the dissertation you came here to write, which I did. And so that's how I got here. And I had an intention to start a training when I realized that sexological body work was wonderful, much needed, and a very helpful training, but it wasn't sufficient for the hands-on skills that could get the kinds of results I was getting with scar tissue. People needed a deeper, more intensive, and more complete education about the nervous system, as well as pelvic physiology and anatomy. And I really wanted to make that available. So I started Stream.
Mm. Mm.
So that's the long and the short of it,
Yeah.
mostly the long of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And only, a tidbit even so. So thank you for sharing your journey and your winding road that got you here. And, I first came in contact with you through my sexological bodywork training. I think that we were shown a video
Mhm.
of you talking about scar tissue remediation. And there was something that you
Mm,
said in there, and I can't remember exactly what the video was and what sort of iteration of your work I was experiencing, but it was, you said something about the intersection of emotions and scar tissue, and that just
yeah.
lit up this whole world in me. And I bookmarked, that was in 2017. In my mind I was like, okay, I'm definitely going to study with Ellen at some point, because there is something here that is just not spoken about and made so much sense to me.
Mm,
And like you were sharing about this sort of process that you teach in Stream about mapping the body and its emotions, and
mhm,
how our emotions can affect our posture, and how our posture over time can harden into scar tissue, and how we can also kind of reverse that process by understanding what domain we are, what domain to sort of enter into. um, I mean,
mm.
I think of Stream as like a kaleidoscope with many eye holes into this like
Yeah.
vast realm of possibility. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about just the four domains of health and what you've learned from, you know, touching so many bodies, particularly when it comes to mapping the body's emotions as well as how it relates to scar tissue.
Well, the answer to where the emotions come from in the body maps back to Chinese medicine and organ systems. And in my experience, I mean, I came into my first awareness of how to orient myself in terms of body work as a shiatsu therapist and a deep tissue body worker. And there was a strange intersection between the two at the shiatsu school where I went to school. We learned about Chinese medicine and organs, emotion relationships. Like there's five basic paired organ systems, and each one relates to an element and also relates to an emotion. But the meridians run over muscles. We also concurrently learned about structural muscles in the body that organize posture. So the relationship of where the meridian runs and the structural muscle it runs over has to do with how that muscle relates to the organ emotion. So the psoas having to do with trust, and the kidneys having to do with fear, and the quadratus lumborum, which lies over the kidneys, having to do with fear, the pectoralis minor having to do with lung energy, because the origin of the lung meridian begins in the belly of the pectoralis minor. So we're right in lung space and opening breath to change grief patterning in the body when we're working in the belly of the pectoralis minor muscle. And I'm like, and the shiatsu school closed, and with it, an incredible body of knowledge that I was heartbroken to see wasn't going to go anywhere. Yes, there were people who attended the shiatsu school who brought it into the yoga community and brought it into holistic healing, but they weren't teaching the techniques. And I thought, well, somebody could do this, and it could be part of Stream, because it was my experience that when people had radical, dramatic tissue change in terms of a scar suddenly letting go of its fibrotic conformation instantaneously, it only happened after a primary emotion, fear or sadness or grieving, or never dissociation. It was more of an active emotion came out of the body. Then the scar would shift really dramatically. And I'm like, okay, does that mean there's an emotion at the heart of every scar? And I really pursued this. I worked with a group of 12 women who all had injuries from childbirth and painful penetration. And it turned out that in a percentage of people, it gets bigger. There's also this notion of the 4 domains of health. Emotions is one domain. We can map emotions onto structure. So now we have emotions and biomechanics that have a relationship. But if we don't take care of biochemistry, inflammation will interrupt that magic moment when the biomechanics correct, the scar also corrects. We have to take care of now biochemistry, biomechanics, and emotions in order for the scar to have that ability to dissolve instantaneously with an emotional release. So I was carrying all of this in my head, as well as all this technique in my head. And I used it clinically in my private practice in Los Angeles as well. I would be in South Africa, or I would be in Hong Kong, I would be in Thailand, and people would come to me and say, I have this problem, I can't get pregnant, or I've got this C-section scar, or I've got this pelvic floor issue, or my back hurts. Can you help me? And so in between lecturing, I would see people wherever it was, on a hotel bedroom at some retreat center somewhere, or so they would find a massage table and bring it with them so I could work with them. And it got to the point where I'd actually tour with my massage table, which was, cumbersome, but productive. I learned a lot about a lot of people, working with them all over the world, and realized that this conjoinment of emotions and scar tissue was very real, and it wasn't necessarily bound by culture. People had it in China just as much as they had it in Thailand, just as much as they had it in South Africa, just as much as they had it in Australia or in the United States or in the UK, etc. So it turned out to be ubiquitous, not specialized to the fruits and nuts that occupy Los Angeles, because anyone could ascribe meaning to anything at some level. And people often do in LA. It's, famous for magical thinking. But when you're working on a businessman in Houston, or you're working on, a secretary in Hong Kong, and they're embedded in whatever culture they believe to be true, but they're still having the same results when emotion is provoked in their body and a scar suddenly changes its conformation. And I think that Ida Rolf was all about this, but she didn't pursue it overtly. She realized that emotion was in tissue, but she also noticed Wilhelm Reich rotting in jail and didn't want to go that route. So she didn't seek to basically liberate the emotional body as such. Even though it was a side effect, it was very much downplayed in Rolfing. So there was this, that was deep tissue for a long time. That was the manifestation that people understood about deep tissue, that it was going to change your biomechanics and change your posture. But a lot of times people did have emotional explosions or emotional upheavals during a Rolfing session that came out of nowhere. They didn't understand. And I'm like, well, what is this thing about fascia and emotions and scars and emotions? This needs to be externalized so people understand why and what it is.
Yeah, wonderful. There's a there's a piece that I love so much that you bring to stream and that I really connect with, is it's not divergent from sexuality. Like, how many pelvic floor practitioners and massage practitioners like go in there and start working with bodies and emotions and muscles, these muscles that store and house emotions, and yet sexuality and pleasure and this whole spectrum of human emotion is just completely not allowed or off the table. And so what I
Really,
love so much
so
about, yeah, yeah. And so I love that you also have this kind of, this permissioning of like bringing sexological body work and bringing pleasure work and bringing, that spectrum of human emotion and sensation onto the table as well. Because without it, it's like there's this huge, the session becomes about avoiding it as opposed to going to what
yes.
actually is present.
I'm sure you see that in your practice when people come to you and start talking about the difference between what they're experiencing on your table and what they may have had with a local physical therapist or a gynecologist or even a sexologist where it's all talking but no touching, or even somebody where
Right.
it's all touching but there's no talking about the emotional aspect of what's happening because that's outside of the scope. I mean, we're very blinded and very compartmentalized in the way we think we must specialize. And I'm a radical holistic inclusionist, meaning I work all of the domains. And if my clients join me and participate in doing their own work in the domains, they get better.
Yeah.
When they don't,
So,
they don't.
right. Right. So
Yeah.
can you, for those that don't know the domains, can you give your like little elevator pitch about the domains of health? I know you
Sure.
love this.
Well, I can tell you, yes, the domains break down like this.
Mhm.
Biochemistry is what's going on in our blood. It has to do what we eat, what we drink, what we smoke, and also all of the environmental toxins we've ever been exposed to that end up constellating in the extracellular matrix, the goop, the interstitium, the goop between the cells becomes a dumping ground because that's where blood becomes lymph in that process of the plasma leaking through a capillary. It's also dumping toxins because it can't afford to be circulating toxins to more sensitive places like the kidneys or the brain, etc. So it ends up in the ECM. So when you press
Mm.
into somebody's tissue and they say, ow, it's because there's toxins in the ECM, which are nerve irritants that make it hurt when you press. It shouldn't hurt. You should be able to get to muscle where muscle meets bone without pain. It should feel good. It should produce heat, much like my experience when that thumb went under my shoulder blade. It made my whole shoulder warm and I felt high as a kite. I was dropped into this quasi hallucinogenic or at least very opiated space. And because I've had a lot of experience with recreational drugs, including an opium addiction, it was very familiar to me. I'm like, wow, you don't need the drug. You can use this with a thumb. I want to know how to do that.
Yep. Yep.
so so that's the biochemical thing. We
Mhm.
are people take hallucinogens to get somewhere, but the truth is we already have all of those chemicals in our system and we can activate them sometimes with our hands. That's very interesting to me. We can
Yeah.
change states with our fingers. We can bring somebody into upregulation, very excited, very emotionally activated, very in their defenses, consciously so. Then we can also, with our hands at the same time or shortly afterwards, really relax somebody to bring them into the deepest level of relaxation that they may have
Mm.
ever experienced. Our hands could be considered to be Schedule One drugs in a certain way because we can use our hands to provoke the chemistry that is scheduled when it's in an exogenous substance that we contain within our own bodies. I mean,
Mm.
to me, that's a miracle that touch
That
does this.
is.
And I think we are so divorced from that in our culture. We think outside substances do this, but we can do it to ourselves and we can do it with other people and to other people if we're in the role of a practitioner and they're in the role of a client. We
Mhm.
can use our understanding of the body's potential to re regulate at the psychological, physiologic, peptide neurochemical level by opening up the places where those peptides live and making it easier for them to get to a target to produce a result.
Mm. There have
I mean,
been,
that's a big deal to me.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, there have been many times where the skills that I've, acquired by being a total psychonaut myself have helped
Yeah.
me to hold and contextualize what I feel and what I see and what I perceive is happening on the table when we get into that really deep state that you're talking about. I call it the psychedelic somatic effect. And you've kind of described it
Yes.
sometimes as like riding on the back of a whale, right? Where it's just like whatever is opening
Yes.
up here, the space, I feel it in my body, they feel in their body, like goes far beyond, the container of this body, the container of this room, the container of this, massage table. I feel that sometimes like jaws open up into like the stratosphere, and pelvises like become the roots of the trees. Like it's incredible what can kind of open up when that biochemistry starts flowing. And it's been very helpful to have that kind of context of like, whoa, this endogenous chemistry is yeah, it's like going on a trip. And so can we just
Yes, we
follow it?
can facilitate that. We can
Mm-hmm.
facilitate that, and that's miraculous.
Yeah.
But biochemistry has a dark side, meaning if there's too much toxin in the system, blockage will occur. And the thing that's great about an Asian medicine background is the question is always, what is the nature of this blockage? Is it biochemical? Oh, wait, maybe it's emotional, or maybe it's biomechanical. Those are flavors of blockage. So
Right.
all we're looking to do in body work is to relieve the blockage, but sometimes we need participation on the part of the client in order to look at doing some cleansing or make some changes in their diet or do some stretching or do some strengthening or learn how to breathe properly or, right? It goes on. There's many things that people can learn to do to participate in their own availability for that endogenous experience we were just talking about, an
Mm-hmm.
altered
Mm-hmm.
state. And I'm not saying that is the sum total of the goal of body work is an altered state, but it is certainly something that can and does happen along the way. I consider body work to be a human potentiator, but we need to have these altered state experiences to potentiate, right? It's not hard to get buy-in on that these days. And
Yeah.
everyone and their cousin and sitting in an ayahuasca circle.
Right.
But guess
Right.
what? You don't need Banisteriopsis copy and Psychotria viridis to get there. You can get there on your own.
Right.
We
Right.
contain DMT. We can experience on the natch right here, right now. It's a molecule away of difference, and hands can be a gateway to get there.
Mm. Mm. And what a radical approach and radical sort of difference, like asking something of our clients, saying, hey, you want this result? Here's what's between you and, no longer experiencing pelvic pain. It's a coffee enema. What? Who would
Yeah.
have thought? Here's something that you need to do to participate in this result. And I find that being sort of a radical difference between sort of run of the mill body work, which is like a person lies on the table and you do things to them, as opposed to this is a interactive participatory exchange in some
Well, we
ways
need
where
to take our bodies more seriously.
yeah.
A body is not just a vehicle, and the body worker is not just a mechanic. It's a cooperative energy exchange that requires full participation of two people in order to create a potentiation. That's a
Mm-hmm.
really different way to look at body work. But there's a lot of interest in magic these days. And I love it. I love that people's minds are opening to the improbable and different routes to take to get there. But the body is certainly as viable a vehicle to achieve the improbable as a state that the body is producing. But it only happens when the four domains are in balance. So we have to educate people about how to get their four domains in balance if they want the improbable to happen, which is a loss, is their pain resolves. Their
Mm-hmm.
pain resolves deeply and permanently and occasionally instantaneously. But the better off somebody is in the balance of their four domains, biochemistry, biomechanics, emotions, and the faster the scar will resolve. And that is when these instantaneous, like, I felt it. Wait, you did too. It just hurt and it's gone. What happened there?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How did that
Yeah.
occur?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a biochemical domain. So let's say the biochemical domain is dialed in, a person's biochemistry is not impeding but helping the healing and movement of scar tissue, then what else becomes possible?
Well, we have to look at biomechanics. How flexible is the person? Because not only they can be biochemically perfect, but if they're completely inflexible, they can't palm the floor. They can't open and get their chest on the floor in a straddle. They can't do a runner stretch and get their knee on the floor. right? These structural muscles may have micro adhesions in them just because the person has never stretched. So stretching can become a viable way to open up the channels. There was this amazing podcast I listened to, Radio Lab, about the interstitium, quote, the discovery, right? How many times has the interstitium been discovered? It's like the G spot. It gets discovered every couple hundred years.
I'm going to name it after me.
That's right. But what was amazing about this Radio Lab and the quote discovery of the interstitium, or at least the most recent realization that it exists in 2017, was that the people who made the Radio Lab were talking to Chinese medicine practitioners who were also biochemists, trying to understand the nature and the function of the interstitium. And they said it is the meridian system. We've known that for thousands of years. And I'm like, well, of course it's the meridian system, the movement, but now there is a fluid dynamic that's part of the interstitium as it's understood now in Western medicine. It's fluid that's moving in the interstitium. That is chi. What precedes the chi? The nerve precedes the chi. The chi is the blood or the plasma that's extracted from blood that goes on to become this gel-like, fluid-like substance in the interstitium.
Mm.
But things hitch rides in that interstitial movement, like cancer cells. And that's one of the reasons cancer has been so hard to treat, is because there's been a misunderstanding of what you need to fight the cancer cell. No, you need to understand its mechanism of movement through the body, which the interstitium is deeply involved in providing. So this whole thing about blockage has much deeper implications for long-term health in the body. How do we open blockage? So we open blockage through stretching. We open blockage through cleansing. We open blockage through coming to know ourselves at an emotional level, to see the unseen parts of our assumptions about who we are. What is our transgenerational trauma, or what is our conditioning, or how do we relate to capitalism? Are we bought in? Do we have religious trauma from growing up evangelical? It goes on and on. There's a lot of negation and mechanization and reduction of the body to just being a machine that is predictable in any of those traditions, when in fact the body is far more vast, more mysterious, and far more capable than any of those traditions admit. I think the body is our road to full potentiation, as to find the improbable, to find the possible, to find the ultimate expression of who we can be. The body is a perfectly well-suited vehicle to provide all those opportunities. But when somebody cross fibers your TFL, your tensor fasciae lata muscle, the muscle that goes right underneath your hip bone between there and the outer thigh, and you jump off the table in a flurry of confusion and giggles, and you don't know why, that bears investigation. What's going on there? It's not just biomechanical. Oh, my hips are tight. I'll say, well, what's your relationship with your parents? Or how do you feel? What does the word self-esteem mean to you? And people look at me and they're like, oh my God, I never thought about that. And then the story starts to unravel. And if you keep testing that muscle over time, it goes from being jumpy to having nothing but heat, liquid heat, like warm honey melting down the meridians of your leg. On the outside of the leg, the gallbladder will open right up. The gallbladder meridian on the side of the leg will start to move heat all the way down to the little toe when it's open. But it was an emotional or an assumption, a conditioning, or a thought process, a self-definition that was keeping that tight.
Yeah. We can't we can't start opening up parts of the body, right? We talk a lot about opening the body, stretching and opening and becoming more flexible, without recognizing and honoring the emotional patterns that have sort of made the body into the shape that it's in. So often when we start doing yoga in different ways, or we start stretching our body in different ways, what do we find there? We find emotion in those muscles. And so
Yes,
to
we find resistance. And that resistance
Mhm,
could look like every time I go into pigeon pose, I burst into tears. Why?
mhm,
What's going on there?
yeah,
What's going on in
yeah.
the piriformis? What's going on in the adductors? What's going on in the hamstrings? We can ask these questions and provide a map as a conversation starter to take a deeper look at what's
Mm,
happening.
mm, yeah. Yeah, what I love so much about the stream model is that it's not, there isn't a hierarchy so much. It's sort of like find the way in to the center. Like, is it through scar tissue? And when scar tissue moves, then we are given this information about emotions and about biochemistry and about biomechanics. Or is it through the actual biomechanical posture of this person's body? And when we
Mhm.
resolve, the emotions that kind of harden a person's body into that shape, then scar tissue
Yes,
moves. And there's so many ways in to this equation. And you say a
that's
lot,
right.
it's about asking the right questions. And I'd love to hear you sort of riff more on, like, how do we ask the right questions?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, we have to have a firm foundation in the model, which is why STREAM is a 2-year program. It takes a long time to wrap your head around biochemistry at the level of specificity, how your liver works, how your kidneys work, how your lungs work. You need to understand each one of these is a system of detoxification. If it's not working properly, then we're going to accumulate things we don't want sticking in our tissues, which are then going to create the kind of blockage to the free movement of the interstitium and the peptides and the chemistry that could be part of our potentiation instead of a blockage to that potentiation. But how do you know? You train your hands to feel. You train your fingers. I got so good at palpating. I could tell if somebody had had a latte an hour they came before they came to the session. I could feel the caffeine in their system. I could feel the difference between caffeine and an antidepressant. I could feel the difference between caffeine and antidepressant and alcoholism. You can just get used. I know what statins feel like. They all have palpatory signatures, and you can learn to get sensitive enough to discern that when you touch people.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
that's miraculous because people are like, oh, how do you know? I have never met you before. They're not supposed to know about my antidepressants. I'm like, I can tell by the way your body twitches. There's a twitch pattern that goes with antidepressant use as you start to downregulate. Your fascia is letting go in an uneven amount of tension that comes up as a twitch that is specific to certain antidepressants. I've
Right,
seen it and
right,
felt it, you know,
right,
and yeah, how did you know I have a thyroid problem? Well, it's because the way your head moves when I touch your neck.
right.
So we ask the right questions because we observe with more acuity. And that's what I'm interested in helping people to learn is those what to look for. There are so many tells in a body. How do you read the tells accurately? You could think like the body work is like a high stakes poker game in a way. You're looking for the secret tell that gives you an entree into what the nature of the blockage is.
Mm, I love
It's,
that.
you know,
It's rooted in, like, it's scientific in a way too. Like, there's a place where the sort of knowing, like, the structures and the organs and the bones and the tissues of the body, and also holding your own sort of intuition and perception in a lot of high esteem and listening.
that's right.
There's some real practice, because I think we're also living in a time where, people say all sorts of shit, like, oh, I saw a past life experience of you doing this and you used to be this, and, like, I see a green aura, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not. And so
Well,
there's this
all
fine
of those
line
are
of,
subjective.
right.
They're
And
all
there's this fine
subjective,
line
but
of like projection, right? There's this fine line of
yes,
projection and
yes,
perception. And I think stream
yes.
practitioners really, like, learn the difference between perception and projection. And it's important in this
It's so
work that we're
important that yes, the difference between projection and perception is the difference between falling prey to new age, that's like new age, kind of rhymes with sewage, kind of projecting unfinished business of your own onto your client, or needing to create a magical story. And there's nothing wrong with magical stories, but if the person is there to resolve a pain problem and you're telling them about their green aura, I don't see how that helps them. If you're telling them if there's a problem with their liver and that's why they have too much estrogen, and that estrogen is causing an inflammation problem and a blood viscosity problem, and here's what you can do to stop that, and they do the thing and then they get better, that's helping them.
Mm.
You can
Yeah.
feel that. I mean, we can, I am a materialist, but I'm not necessarily a reductionist. I'm a material inclusionist, not a
Mhm.
material reductionist. I'm not trying to, um, I'm always parsing, but there's a difference between discernment and reducing something. A discernment is separating this from that. A reductionist is just, well, it's not that, and it's not that, and it's not that. And yes, we do that to some. We have to rule out what it isn't to find out what it is, but we have to be inclusive of the whole body as an expression of that thing.
Yeah.
Not just, oh, well, if I touch your liver and your liver hurts or is tender, it's a liver problem. No. How about I'm going up your inner thigh with my thumb and it feels achy and bruisey? That is also a liver problem.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
And speaking of, being inclusive in the body, we work in and on and around places that many practitioners avoid. So internal pelvic work, internal anal work, internal jaw and mouth work.
that's
And this feels like, these are places that hold a lot of emotional content and often hold, a lot of scar tissue for various reasons. And so I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about like the importance of internal work when it's appropriate and
sure.
when it's necessary in stream. Yeah.
Well, if there's a scar and it's inside of, let's say it's in the sulcus, the membrane between the vagina and the anus, for instance, working anywhere else except that place isn't going to change that scar. It's not going to go away by itself. But it can go away with the introduction of appropriate touch, good technique, and some castor oil. And if the person is sensitive to castor oil, which is like 1 in 10,000, maybe, you could use something else, sesame oil, or sometimes even a water-based lubricant. But castor oil is uniquely anti-inflammatory, and a scar is usually an ongoing inflammatory process. That's why it doesn't just go away. The body is remaking itself constantly, including the scar tissue that's inside of us. So we want to interrupt the scar making program, and sometimes castor oil is instrumental in the interruption of that program. Castor oil
Mhm.
plus the emotion that's creating some chronic tension at the autonomic level, meaning the blood vessels and the lymphatic system aren't operating because they're squunched together because there's unconscious holding in the smooth muscle cells of the fascia surrounding this structure. So we can bring the conscious attention, like turn on the light, the proprioceptive light, by touching and talking, creating an association and lighting up a space that has been out of conscious awareness. And sometimes that will bring up the emotion. When the emotion goes, then the scar goes. And that's the story I'm telling myself now about why we get the results we get. So we have to touch the spot, but the spot is in a room with the lights turned off in terms of our self-perception inside of our brain, our proprioceptive self-map. We hear words about whether the little gnome-shaped man, the proprioceptive self, is or is not localized between the temporal lobe and the frontal lobe of the brain, or the parietal lobe of the brain. It may be, it may not be, but I do know that we carry a map of self outside of that's non-local inside of our bodies, and we need to map every place there is a scar back onto that non-local map in order to make the connection so emotion can open up the tissue. If it's a a scar is an encapsulation. Part of what's being encapsulated is emotional material. Not always, but such a majority of the time.
Mm.
So the scar is also an infection. It's an encapsulation of an inflammatory process and an emotion. And when the emotion comes up and you're using an anti-inflammatory compound like castor oil, and you're bringing more blood and better lymphatic drainage with the manual techniques you're using, then the scar can fundamentally change its form as you hold space for the person to feel safe in having a relationship with the emotion that's also encapsulated there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it it unceasingly blows my mind. I mean, I'm on the table with my client being like, "Wow, where did it go?" As much as they are. I'm like, What happened there? Let's unpack that together, because it does feel miraculous when someone has come onto my table who's been experiencing painful penetration for 25 years after falling
Yes.
off of a horse, and in one session I feel the bone, I feel where that break is in their pelvis. I feel the bones move into alignment. I feel the bundle of, fascia and scar tissue that has been encapsulating it move, and it's like you say, like cellophane, you're smoothing out like cellophane in the tissue, along with a big emotional release or a remembrance of a part of the story that they had forgotten. And
Yes.
they come back a week later, 2 weeks later, a year later, and it's gone. The pain is gone. And it's just,
Yes.
it's amazing. It's amazing.
It is
And so I
amazing.
think that,
Go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. Yeah. And so I think it's the alignment of these, understanding these four domains and how they, that whatever secret sauce that happens when they all, align and coordinate with each other, that we see
Yeah.
these sort of miraculous results that are really unheard of in most, common medical practices.
Yeah. People don't believe in the healing potential of the body. I mean, that's not entirely true. Andrew Weil, a famous holistic doctor, wrote a book called Spontaneous Healing. He certainly had the experience of seeing it, but he didn't know how to recreate it. I'm saying there's a science to the creation of that or the recreation of that, and it means parsing accurately among four domains of health. That's one way to do it. Chinese medicine has its ways of doing it. Ayurveda has its ways of doing it. Yoga has its ways of doing it. Martial arts has its ways of doing it. All these systems are based in an energetic understanding that energy moves through the body and in a palpable way. And that's how you track how healthy you are, is what kind of energy and how palpable is it? And is it getting to every part of you? What happens when
Mm.
you gift 90 minutes of attention to a painful place in your body, and you've done something to alleviate that pain after 90 minutes of conscious breath applied to that area? That is a miracle to me. And that really informed the way I thought about, well, if breath can help, and then you introduce touch, and then you introduce a potent anti-inflammatory compound, then what's possible? And the answer is a whole lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what would you say, if there's somebody out there that's listening to this and maybe feeling some despair in their pelvic, symptoms, having experienced pelvic pain for many years, like what can they do? Where can they go? What should they do first to sort of start to walk this
They
road
should,
of pelvic healing?
sure. Education is number one. Understand what is a pelvis, what's in your pelvis, and how is your pelvis situated biomechanically? What's going on in your posture? Take a picture or go to a body worker and have a conversation about what's going on. What is the disposition of this pelvis? Take a scar history. What happened to this pelvis? Did you fall off a horse, or did you fall off your skateboard, or that time when you hit your pubic bone on the edge of the pool, or, all of the things that happen to people emotionally and physically in their history? Taking a scar inventory historically can be very helpful. And you can take that to a professional and say, well, this happened to me. Could this have to do with my pelvic pain? And if they know what they're doing and they say, yes, maybe that's a good person to work with. Um, And the other question I would ask is, are you constipated? If you're having pain in your pelvis, how might constipation um, create or exacerbate that pain? And when I say constipation, I don't mean going twice a week. I mean going twice a day.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not going
Back to the
twice a day, that could
biochemical.
be a form of constipation. Back to the biochemical, because for certain kinds of pelvic pain, especially endometriosis, there's often a rich history of constipation associated with it. And people don't, for lack of putting that together, people don't heal from endometriosis. But when people do understand, I've seen many people heal endometriosis by attending to their bowels and attending to their liver and then taking care of flexibility and scars. And then the endo is gone and they don't suffer anymore.
Mm. Mm. Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So these are, you know, giving whoever is out there listening, wondering like, okay, well, I hear all these cool things about pelvic pain, but what can I do about mine? Here are a couple of really solid questions to start asking,
Yeah.
right? About asking the
The
right
right
questions.
questions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I love to kind of wrap up these interviews a little bit by, this is the Boldly Embodied podcast. This is, the name of my practice is called Boldly Embodied because I think that it's an invitation. And so I
Mm.
like to ask people, what does being boldly embodied mean to you, whether it's to you personally or to you professionally in your practice? Like what does it mean to be really fully boldly embodied?
Well, I like the word boldly because there's an implication of fearlessness there. And fearlessness has to do with not being willing to entertain new ideas that might sound outrageous. The fearlessness in trying something before you dismiss it. That's how we become fully embodied, is by experimentation
Mm.
and examining our prejudices about what the body is capable of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So true. Thank you. Thank you. So
Mhm.
are there any ways, how can people continue to find you, engage with you, work with you, play with you, learn from you? Tell us what you're up to, Ellen, if there's anything you'd like someone to know.
Well, they can find me through my scar tissue remediation website. It's scartissueremediation.com. I may be resurrecting my personal website, but that's right now it just is a redirect to the scar tissue website because that's where I've been busy and active. If people are interested in studying, they can go to the scar tissue remediation and apply. They can fill out an application form and we can have a conversation. And if it's a good fit, they can come into the program. I'm doing open enrollment this year rather than cohort based enrollment because it just seems I'm experimenting. I'm trying to see how I am experimenting with what happens when I do open enrollment rather than wait for a bunch of people to be interested and then say, okay, let's start together. Because the truth is, Stream is very much a personalized program based on mentorship, and everyone takes the amount of time they take to get through it. I have students from 2020 who are just completing now. I have students from 2022 who are done. Really, it takes a minimum of 2 years, but sometimes people say, well, I never want to leave this cocoon. And that's fine. But I do want people to go out and start practicing because I want people to be helped. I realized early on, I'm only one pair of hands and there's only so many people I could help. I want to multiply the efficacy of this understanding and send many skilled practitioners because we need hordes, a horde of eager healers to reverse the prejudices and the beliefs that people have about what their possibilities are in terms of healing and alleviation of pain, and the way birth care delivery is provided in this country creates quite a lot of scar tissue. There's quite a ginormous need, ginormous. So I'm eager to train people who want to help and effectively. So they can find out more at scartissueremediation.com. And you can follow me
Beautiful.
on Instagram and
Yeah,
follow me on Facebook and stuff, but I'm not that active there, to be honest. I've been too busy with my students. But,
I
I'm
can attest to that. I can attest to that. Oh, well, thank you so much, Ellen, for, doing what is yours to do here in your body and sharing everything that you've learned from, all of these ways that you listen and feel and perceive and know, and, doing the real work of like distilling it into teachable material for
Teachable
those of us who are,
nuggets.
yeah, teachable nuggets. Those of us who want to learn can learn. So thank you. And thank you for being with us here on the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Juliana. It's so wonderful to have this conversation with you. I always love where we go together. It's so much fun.